For this particular gun, we're going to reach way back. Following the Franco-Prussian War, the newly unified Germany had a difficult task at hand, the standardization of arms. The rifle was first, and we'll cover it another day. The handgun would, eventually, follow. Once the decision was made, however, it would outlast its contemporaries for a good few decades. Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the German Reichsrevolver Model 1879. Let's take a look at the light box. At over 12 inches long and weighing just over 2 pounds, this is a massive handgun. It chambers the 10.6 German cartridge. I hate to be negative, but this gun was obsolete the day it was adopted. The Germans technically are competing with the French at this time, and they already have a single and double action revolver that's fairly modern. Whereas this is like a latter-day cowboy gun. Here, let's take a closer look. Now this is a single action only revolver, which means I have to manually cock that hammer back every single shot. The trigger only releases the hammer. It does thankfully have a half cock position, which means that I don't have to carry on an empty, chamber. But that frees the cylinder to rotate, so if you're halfway through the cylinder, you have a chance of bumping back onto an already shot cartridge. It's a gate loader, which means you can only load one cartridge at a time. There's no helpful index for that. You have to manually thumb that over. There's no provision for an ejection system, so you have to take a little stick that comes in your holster and poke out each spent cartridge individually. This is really slow tech. It does have one added feature: a beautiful manual safety on a single action revolver. I'm not really sure what the thought process was here. I mean, the weight required to get this hammer back enough to manage to fall on a live cartridge is pretty significant, but we flip this lever and you can no longer withdraw that hammer. The peace of mind is astounding. Now, I'm being rough, but there are some good features of this gun. First of all, it was chambered in a clone of .44 Smith & Wesson, which is a beautiful cartridge, so at least it had some nice heavy-hitting power. We can also take a look at one good mechanical feature of this particular revolver. Give me just a moment. Get everything out of my way. They milled down into the cylinder so that the cartridge fits nice and flush, and that way if there's any sort of casing failure, you're not eating a lot of hot gas. They also numbered each of the chambers in the cylinder, so despite the fact that this thing can tend to wander, at least you know where you are with a not-so-cursory glance. Now remember, this is the Model 1879. There's going to be another Reichsrevolver, the later Model 1883. It's going to be more compact with a shorter barrel, shorter, more manageable grip. We just didn't have one on hand to show you guys, but if we get one, we promise to do another video. Now, that particular gun would go on to see a few little improvements. Most notably, there would be a commercial double trigger version that emulated a double action revolver. But that's not really strictly military. Now, both the 1879 and 1883 display some handy markings. Here on the frame, we'll see the manufacturer. These include Waffenfabrik von Drais, Gebrüder Mauser and Company, and a consortium consisting of Sauer & Son, V.C. Schilling, and C.G. Haenel makes up the last marking. These all apply to the 1879 or the 1883, but only the 1883 was also produced by the Royal Prussian Arsenal at Erfurt. You can also find the test proof for your Reichsrevolver here on the left side of the barrel. These will vary by which state accepted it. So here we have Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, and Württemberg. All good? Great. Let's take a look at how these guns actually work. The Reichsrevolver does have a half-cock position, allowing the cylinder to turn and preventing the hammer from following. As we've said, this is a single-action revolver, so the hammer must be manually thumbed back. It catches on a notch attached to the trigger. When pulled, the trigger releases the hammer. A hand is attached to the hammer. As it is turned back, the hand rises to rotate the cylinder. A cylinder stop sits in front of the trigger. Its spring presses it towards the cylinder, but is held back by the sloped top of the trigger. When cocked, the trigger is lowered, allowing the cylinder stop to rise, locking the cylinder in place for firing. The safety mechanism is simple. It features a cylinder with a notch cutout that allows the hammer to pass through when in the off position. When on, it blocks the movement of the hammer. That's pretty much it for the basic functions of this very simple single-action revolver. We could have animated the loading and unloading, but being a single gate loader, there's not a lot to show. We'll just have Mae give us a rundown outside.
With the hammer in the half-cock position, I open the gate and begin loading. It takes a while, one by one. Single action only means I have to pull the hammer back for every shot. The safety prevents me from cocking the hammer, although the heavy hammer spring practically does that already. We used a fairly light load to protect this old museum piece, so recoil for the original ammo should have been more severe. Let's quickly review those target hits. Not too bad. Half cock before opening the gate. And good thing we had this stick, because there is no ejector.
You know, as much movement as there was in that video, I think Mae made it look easier than it actually is to use this thing. If we haven't sold you yet, let's reiterate one more time. This gun is slow, and a lot of people wonder why. The truth is, handguns don't become important until World War I. Not really. There's a few exceptions. The British and the US obviously have colonial problems, and there's a few other minor issues that come up with other countries where they start to put a little more emphasis on these things, but when this was adopted, it just wasn't important. And so they went with rugged, rugged, rugged over every other thing available. You know, it's not without precedent. I mean, you see it in the story of the Schofield, which we may cover another day. Anyway, the Germans felt like officers needed to be officers. They needed to lead men, not actually fight. So the idea of this revolver was really just 6 shots of defense. Now, if you're cavalrymen, you might say, well, what about them? They need to have the ability to defend themselves effectively and reload. But again, this isn't a secondary weapon. It's third tier, after the saber. So honestly, it does the limited job that it was given pretty well, and is otherwise kind of a heavy weight on your belt. Despite all of that, service life for this thing is remarkable. I mean, think of all the French guns that we talked about on our way to World War I. This is it. This is the German standard sidearm, this in the 1883 version, all the way up until the adoption of the Luger P08, which we'll cover pretty soon, actually. This, straight to Luger. I mean, that's a phenomenal jump, and it shows that the Germans could be, in many ways, very slow and careful about their selection of arms. They're almost the antithesis of the French in that regard, because you see all these beautiful ideas coming from the French, and then the execution's sloppy because they just jumped on it too fast. The Germans the other way around. They just wait and wait and wait until it's practically a crisis, and then they make a huge jump, and it turns out pretty well. This gun excluded, though. Anyway, it served all the way through World War I, and that tends to be about it for this one. I mean, yeah, technically you can see it in some documents for World War II, but that's pushing it to call it actually a service weapon at that point. And even in World War I, it was second line. As a matter of fact, we'll pop up a photo here. You see, the heel will be marked with whatever unit it was issued to. And in most of these cases, it's going to be marked twice with a line through one of them. The cross-through would have been the original unit markings, and then by the time we get around to World War I, they're getting reissued somewhere else, so it gets struck out and the new units are marked. Now, if you'd like to be able to read these, it's a little involved, so you may want to check out a book called The Imperial German Regimental Marking by Jeff Knoll. Alright, I've badmouthed this gun enough. Let's get Mae in here. She's actually shot it, so she can sit down with me and badmouth it for herself. One day we'll get a bigger set so that I don't have to reconfigure everything just to have Mae on screen, but until then, we've gone ahead and gotten ready for her again, and let's get her impressions of this Reichsrevolver. Here you go.
Thanks. You know, I'm a wheelgun girl. I love revolvers. Single action revolvers, that's in my wheelhouse, pun intended. But why on earth were they making a single action revolver this late? It's ridiculous.
That aside, we do need to talk about the gun. So let's just wipe the slate clean of dates. We'll pretend we're in a timeless period. Let's just talk about using the gun as a shooter. Just how easy or hard or whatever it is to get through the process that is this revolver. And we'll start with your favorite, loading.
Right, loading. My favorite on this gun. You have to flip open the gate. And make sure you line it. Oh wait, if you don't line it up, guess what? You've got to go all the way to the start again. You have to load in each individual cartridge yourself. And then after you finish firing them, you have to poke them out with, yes, your very own stick or a stick you find on the ground that happens to fit. Takes forever to load.
All right, these were issued with purpose-made devices in the holster that you could poke out your spent casings. Obviously, we didn't have the original holster and pokey stick, so we used a little piece of wood that we had handy, as you saw in the video. Mae was not necessarily a fan of doing 12 takes with this system. All right, loading aside, how about shooting it?
Well, for shooting it, your hand has to be held so far back to actually be in line with the trigger. And then for cocking the hammer, you can see it in the video how awkward it is. You have to maneuver your hand up so that you can pull the hammer back. And ladies and gentlemen, this is not an easy hammer. I actually had to train for a week with one of those little hand strengthening things just to be able to work the hammer. But you know, as far as the action goes, the trigger is fairly nice. I will say that about it. The trigger itself is actually nice.
Well, when it's single action only, you always have a single action trigger, so at least there's that. Is there anything else about this gun that you found positive?
Well, the ammo itself is practically a clone of the 44 Russian, which I like the ammunition. It worked well for me. But other than that, nothing about this gun makes sense to me.
All right, I have to ask, how do you feel about the safety?
I don't want to talk about it. What is this?
All right, final question that we have to ask. Would you take it into battle?
No.
Well, on that note, I think we've wrapped up the Reichsrevolver. So if you're watching, I'm going to go ahead and post our Patreon level down below. We're filming way ahead of time now, so I have no clue where we're at with this one. It's going to be a month before this thing gets dropped. But yet again, thanks for joining us. And if there's anything new that needs to be discussed, I'll go ahead and put it on after the credits.